Good morning. This virtual assembly is an attempt to stay in touch with everyone, to remember that weekly events at school and for the community are important ways to be connected and to celebrate who we are and to talk openly about any issue at school. Uh, Yesterday, for example, I was disappointed to write everyone to say that we would need to stay in remote learning. I had hoped and expressed in almost every communication that we would find a way to be back face to face on the campus sometime toward the end of this year. The governor's announcement on Wednesday left, I think, no room for that eventuality. But perhaps there'll be some changes that will allow for some events. I'll refer to that in just a moment. I'd like to say a little bit about remote learning. I am grateful for the ways in which the faculty and the students and the families have accepted this new normal. I've been impressed with the work you've done, and I am very hopeful that, as I wrote yesterday, that these next 4 weeks will be even better than the previous 4 weeks. So thanks for what you're doing. Find the good in that opportunity. I mean, there's a myriad of ways in which you can express ideas, you can do some research, you can participate, you can collaborate with others. You can find ways to get to know the subject and your teachers in a different way than the traditional methods, obviously, that we use on campus. I also think it's important to talk a little bit about kind of who you are during this time. Uh, it's easy perhaps to dwell on some of the negative aspects, but there are many positive aspects. Family rituals are changing. Uh, Figuring out, how creative you are by yourself or productive and self-disciplined you are. Those are important topics to think about during this remote learning period and this time at home. A number of you have impressed me with efforts to do some service. For example, those of you involved with Best Buddies did a Zoom communication with a number of the students and individuals you work with through Best Buddies. I know that meant the world to them. Others of you have made masks. You've contacted uh, residential nursing homes to talk to people who are obviously lonely. Finding ways to get out of ourselves can be really important. And also just being creative during this time. And even if you don't sort of see yourself as a creative individual, creatively explore ways in which you can stretch who you are, uh, what your aspirations are. For example, it is obviously a different time to do college visits and research, but you can learn a lot by talking to our current seniors who incidentally have done really well this year with college admissions. I'm eager to talk about that in an upcoming virtual assembly. Finally, in terms of this introduction, I wanted to say that I am going to make some announcements next week about the end of the year and any ways in which I see we can do events and some other virtual events that we will have. So look forward, I hope, to those announcements next week. I wanted to congratulate Coach Killian, who was named the coach of the year in swimming, Patrick Powell for his accomplishments in swimming, and two of our relay teams. I also wanted to congratulate Alston Aaron and Luke Haley on being named to the Mid-State selection team, and I wanted to send best wishes to our debate team who are competing in the largest tournament of the year this weekend. And so we should have some updates next week about how they've done. We now plan to introduce the college essay contest. This contest is set up annually to recognize 3 outstanding college essays. There are several reasons why we think this is important. Perhaps foremost is it's a good educational moment. The college essay is arguably one of the specific ways in which you can express to a college who you are. You can demonstrate how you think and how you write. And in some ways, you could argue that it's the most authentic part of your application. We see this as a really smart way to talk to the underclassmen about coming up with ideas and approaches for a college essay. And certainly we see it as an important way to congratulate 3 of our seniors who have done a terrific job in writing their college essays and now delivering them in front of you. So what we're going to do is have them introduce themselves and read their college essay, and let you consider which one you think would deserve to be ranked as the top of the 3. And then next week, when we have another virtual assembly, I will announce the winner. So please now look forward to hearing these 3 college essays.
The dented 2008 Toyota Corolla zoomed down the Florida backroads, leaving the figures of tropical trees to dissolve in the darkness behind us. Outside, only the dull sound of crashing waves on a distant coast broke the night silence. But inside the car, my ears smarted from the booming, recorded voice of the British philosophy lecturer. As the professor explained dialectical materialism, my father and I grinned at each other. Not because we already completely understood the subject, but because we knew we never would. Although the trip included visiting as many local barbecue stands and seafood shacks as we could, the goal of our journey lay in a gratification far less material. In between stops for hot wings or baked oysters, my dad criticized both my grasp of Kantian metaphysics and my grasp on the turn signal lever. We had chosen to spend the final days of the summer before my sophomore year driving along the Florida coastline to listen to philosophy podcasts. Since this was the final day of our road trip, we had settled on our last philosopher, Marx, after having already encountered Hume and Foucault. And although we had been chugging coffee to stay up late in an effort to absorb more knowledge, my excitement came not from the caffeine coursing through my veins, but from the pride I felt from being able to hold a philosophical discussion with my dad for the very first time. Instead of simple pedantic understandings of the subject matter, independent perceptions and opinions began to coalesce in my mind. But my philosophical journey had begun 3 years earlier, as the same Toyota carried me to my first day of 7th grade. Having to haul me to and from school daily from 7th through 9th grade, my dad decided to put the time to good use by playing introductory philosophy podcasts, starting with Socrates and Plato, then discovering modern thought in the form of Nietzsche and Heidegger. I became lost in a sea of philosophy with only my dad to keep me afloat. And at first, I mistakenly assumed the podcast to be immutable, objective descriptions of reality, as opposed to malleable, subjective knowledge. Every time that I was captivated by a philosopher's argument and took it as gospel, we would move on to a new scholar the next week. And everything that I thought I knew came crashing down around me. These cycles of belief and subsequent disillusionment taught me to approach the world with inherent skepticism, a mode of critical thinking that could be applied to any educational query. Epistemic humility, acknowledging, as Friedrich Hegel said, that absolute certainty is the poorest form of truth, became the only dogma that I would embrace. With my head spinning from all of the conflicting worldviews, I entered school each day confident only that I knew nothing for certain. Instead of the Florida trip ending with my now familiar feeling of existential confusion, I returned with a newfound confidence. For the first time since the departure of this philosophical magic school bus, I felt a growing competence in my ability to dissect philosophical argumentation, even if I was no closer to arriving at philosophical truth. As I began to drive myself in the Toyota during sophomore year, I assumed responsibility for my own philosophical discovery and began to explore my fascination with utilitarianism as opposed to my dad's passion for existentialism. I had now learned enough to argue on my own effectively with my father, and these discussions compelled me continually to strengthen my positions. Although these arguments, which now occur across our kitchen table instead of in the Toyota, sway mostly in favor of my father, this back and forth cycle cemented the importance of process over product in education. Now, when I climb into my car and listen to my philosophy podcasts, I'm neither confused nor disheartened by my own uncertainty, which instead inspires me to continue on the unending road of intellectual exploration. Thank you.
When I was 12, I returned from winter break to find the word Jew scrawled across my athletic locker. I think back and try to remember my exact feelings or what I did, but 5 years later, I'm still numb. I often wonder which of the smiling faces around me did it. Until that year, most of my life had been spent around other Jewish people. Through sixth grade, I attended a Jewish preschool and elementary school, and if I lived in New York or LA, this statement might not be significant, but I live in Nashville, Tennessee. The population is approaching 1.5 million, and the Jewish population is estimated at 9,000. That I lived so much of my childhood with only an undercurrent of being different is pretty remarkable. My first indication that being Jewish might not be as common as I thought came in Little League when my 7-year-old teammates were trying to comprehend the fact that I believed Jesus existed and that he was a nice guy, but that he wasn't the Son of God. I learned to stand quietly and respectfully while they prayed before games. I learned to ask if the vegetables were actually vegetarian, as bacon is used like salt in the South. But on that day in January, being different became more than just an undercurrent. It was the roar of a tidal wave crashing around me, and I was changed in ways that I still don't fully understand. It is hard to feel that you belong once your otherness is pointed out, and through my 6 years at MBA, I've never quite felt it as my home the way many of my classmates do. I often wonder if that would have been different had just one person apologized or reached out to me in any way after that day in January, but no one did. When my freshman year rolled around, I was finally old enough to join B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, and it has changed my life. The more involved I became, the more I realized that I had the opportunity and the responsibility to use my voice as regional vice president to help students in other small Jewish communities find that same connection. My friends and I began working to expand our 5-state region, which will now include a chapter in Little Rock, Arkansas. This past summer, I participated in ETGAR 36. A group of teens traveled by bus across the United States, learning from leaders on multiple sides of social justice issues, such as living wage, abortion, gun control, immigration, and marriage equality. I learned that it is important to use my voice to reach out to all people who are feeling disconnected, not just other Jewish teens. I met Daryl Davis, a black man who has helped more than 200 people leave the KKK simply by outstretching his arm and finding ways to connect. He said, "How can you hate me if you don't know me?" This caused me to pause and reflect on how we can love one another if we don't know each other. My time at MBA has pushed me to figure out who I am and what is most important to me in a way that I don't think I would have had if I had attended a school where everyone was similar to me. As I begin transitioning to this next part of my story, I will take what I have learned and find the courage as Daryl Davis has to know people well enough to love them and to be that outstretched arm that helps them feel connected.
Still navigating my way through the unfamiliar streets of downtown Nashville, I prepared for a busy Wednesday at work, and the minimal interaction I assumed my superiors would want with an intern that day. Hours later, with my lunch break nearing, I plotted every movement for reaching my turkey sandwich without drawing attention. My plans went awry, however, when my superior invited me to join coworkers at a nearby restaurant. I found myself in a large car with my entire team from the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. Confused, I surmised that my third day of work was also Miss Paula's birthday. Miss Paula, one of the highest-ranking officials in the department, oversaw another woman, who oversaw an entire team, who oversaw me. At the restaurant, I wondered why I was included at such a star-studded lunch. In my mind's eye, I had little business eating with those around me, and even less with the boss's boss. As the food arrived, just before I was able to reach my fork, The individual to my immediate left grasped my hand. Startled, I glanced up and found those around me, with hands locked, eyes closed, heads bowed. The only link missing was the one between the man to my right and me, and noticing that, I made the swift connection before lowering my own head over my shadow and my eyelids over my eyes. With a soft silence imperfect only through noise from other tables, Miss Paula paused for a breath, and then she led us in grace. Eyes closed, I was instantly in a much older chair, still wooden, but less comfortable, 10 years earlier. I sat around a table, this one at my grandparents' house with family, right before dinner. I listened and patiently waited as my grandfather called on my oldest cousin to lead a prayer over the bread. After that cousin finished, another began. Then my brother. Then a few more cousins and another brother. Then I had the honor. Per tradition, we had to say that prayer only once, but the words on that page of the aged prayer book were repeated as many times as there were grandchildren sitting around that table. In Bipa's house, everyone was a leader. Everyone an equal member of the family that gathered most Friday nights to be together so long ago. As the light of the present world filled my eyes again, I found myself more attentive to the words of my colleagues, and the sound of their joyful laughter still rings in my ears today. That moment was important not only because the team's welcoming gesture was reminiscent of a time in my past, but also because it reflected their dedication to inclusion, even in such an intimate moment. Those words of grace were ones they lived. Just as they committed to giving me a spot at the lunch table, they worked to ensure every single Tennessean a seat at the table of community development. Before I began with the department, I expected to leap into projects concerning economic development in high-volume destinations like my hometown, Nashville. Instead, I found myself investigating the root causes of hospital closures in rural Tennessee and reporting on other issues related to underserved communities in the state. Indeed, the focus of the department and my own work rested not in the cultural prowess of urban hubs, but in grants, infrastructure, and problem solving for areas of the state that need it most. What mattered in the grace of that lunch and at Friday night dinners at my grandparents' house was not that the two were of different religions and times, but that they both reflected a practiced lifestyle of open arms toward everyone. Grace is universal, and I strive to live it through a commitment to treating the wider community as my own guests at the table for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you for being online asynchronously today. We thought we would set it up in such a fashion so that you could watch this at a convenient time and not have to be locked into the specific assembly time. I want to say that the faculty and I miss you tremendously. And I think it's apparent from just listening to the voices that I hear through class, advisory, and other means that a lot of you miss the community at MBA. And that, I think, speaks volumes about the strength and the substance and the significance of what we have developed together at school and the kinds of friendships you have among one another and with the faculty and staff. I wish you a great week and look forward to being back with you.